For some background, I am 23 years old and have 2 sisters and 1 brother. Both of my sisters have kids, and since I was a teenager, I have been the go-to babysitter in the family. It started small, watching my nieces and nephews for a few hours while my sisters ran errands, went on dates, or just needed a break. I never minded because, first of all, they always asked. It was never an assumption that I would be available, and they respected when I said no. Second, they paid me. Not anything crazy, but enough to show that they valued my time. And third, I actually love my nieces and nephews. They are sweet kids, and I did not mind spending time with them. This system worked well for years. I was never treated like a free daycare. My sisters and I had an understanding, and it was all very fair. Then my brother found out. Now, my brother has kids, too. I will be honest, I am not as close to them as I am to my sister's kids, but that is not my fault. My brother has always been more distant from the family, and he and I have never had a close relationship. He does not communicate the way my sisters do. He never really asks for help or seems interested in being part of the family dynamic in the same way my sisters are. So, when he suddenly realized that our sisters had been bringing their kids to me for babysitting, his response was not to ask me if I would do the same for him. It was not to offer payment or check if I was available. No, his reaction was to assume that I was just a free childcare provider and that he could drop his kids off whenever he pleased. The first time it happened, I was home alone on my day off, enjoying my peace and quiet. Then there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find my brother standing there with his 2 kids, who are both pretty young. He looked at me and said, "I will be back in the evening," and then, before I could even process what was happening, he just walked away. I stood there in shock, watching as he got into his car and drove off, leaving me with his kids on my doorstep. I was stunned. Completely speechless. This had never happened before. My sisters never just dropped their kids off without talking to me first. I had no warning, no prior conversation, nothing. He had just dumped his children on me like I was a random daycare. At first, I panicked. I had absolutely no idea what to do. I had never been put in a situation like this before. These were not just some neighbor's kids. They were my brother's children. But I had not agreed to watch them. I had not even been asked. I tried calling my brother, but of course, he did not answer. I sent texts. No response. I was getting increasingly anxious because I knew one thing for certain, I was not about to just take responsibility for these kids when I never agreed to it. That was not fair to me, and it was not fair to them either. So, after some deliberation, I made a decision I never thought I would have to make. I called Child Protective Services. I told them the situation. I told them that my brother had literally abandoned his kids on my doorstep without asking me, that I had no idea how long he was going to be gone, and that I was not comfortable being put in this situation. They took it very seriously. They asked me a bunch of questions, assured me that I had done the right thing, and sent someone over. When CPS arrived, they took control of the situation. They were very professional, asked me a lot of questions, and made sure the kids were safe. I was relieved that I did not have to handle this alone. And then my brother came back. The moment he saw the CPS workers at my house, he lost it. He started yelling, demanding to know what was happening, calling me every name in the book. He accused me of betraying him, of being dramatic, of ruining his life over something so small. I stood my ground. I told him he had no right to abandon his kids on me like that. That I was not his babysitter. That he had never even asked if I was available, let alone offered to pay me like our sisters did. He just assumed I would take them without question. CPS got involved in the argument. They told him that what he did was completely unacceptable, that he could not just dump his kids on someone without consent, and that this situation could have had serious consequences. He kept arguing, but at the end of the day, there was no defending what he did. He left furious, swearing that I had destroyed our family and that he would never speak to me again. Honestly? Good. Because I do not want to be involved with someone who thinks it is okay to force his children onto someone else without their permission. Since then, things have been tense in the family. My sisters are on my side. They completely understand why I did what I did and agree that our brother was way out of line. My parents, on the other hand, are trying to smooth things over, telling me that family helps family and that I should have just dealt with it instead of calling CPS. But I refuse to feel guilty. This was not my responsibility, and my brother learned that the hard way. So, am I the villain for calling CPS on my own brother? Maybe to him. But I would do it again in a heartbeat. Update 1. I did not think things could get worse, but somehow, they did. After my brother's meltdown and CPS getting involved, I assumed that things would eventually settle down. That maybe he would realize that what he did was unacceptable. That maybe my family would understand why I had no choice but to call for help. I thought that, at the very least, my sisters would have my back. I was wrong. The calls started almost immediately. First, it was my parents. My mom was the first to reach out, her voice thick with disapproval as she asked me how I could do this to my own family. She did not ask how I was feeling or if I was okay. She did not ask why I had made the call. She went straight into telling me that family is supposed to take care of each other, that I should have handled it privately, that I had humiliated my brother and now the government was involved in our family business. My dad was not as dramatic, but he was clearly on her side, telling me that I had overreacted and that my brother had just made a mistake. Then came my sisters. At first, I thought they were calling to support me. After all, they had always paid me for babysitting, always asked me if I was available, always respected my boundaries. But no. They were furious. Furious that I had gone nuclear and brought CPS into the situation. Furious that now, my brother's life was a mess, because of me. They insisted that, yes, what he did was wrong, but I should have just taken care of the kids that one time and confronted him about it later. I tried to explain. I told them that it was not about the inconvenience. It was not about me being difficult or dramatic. It was about the fact that he had abandoned his children without a word. That he had assumed I would take care of them and given me no choice in the matter. That if I had just let it happen, it would have kept happening. But they did not want to hear it. My older sister in particular was livid. She said that by involving CPS, I had made it so much worse and now my brother might lose custody of his kids. She acted as though I had called them out of spite, rather than out of genuine concern. She told me that I should have just been the bigger person and sucked it up for the sake of family. I asked her if she would have done it. If she would have taken my brother's kids in with no notice, no discussion, no respect for her time or boundaries. She avoided answering that question. But the worst part was my mom. The moment she realized I was not backing down, she decided to up the ante. That was when she hit me with her biggest threat yet. She told me that the house I lived in, the one I had thought of as my house for years, was actually hers. She had helped me buy it, and her name was still on some of the paperwork. And if I was going to treat family like this, if I was going to disrespect them and act like I was above them, then maybe I did not deserve to live there anymore. That hit me like a truck. I had worked so hard to build my independence. I had never once asked my parents for money after moving out. I paid my own bills, took care of everything myself, never relied on them for anything. But my mom had conveniently kept her name attached to my home just in case she ever needed leverage against me. And now she was using it. I felt sick. Everything started spiraling. My brother was still refusing to speak to me, but he had no problem badmouthing me to the rest of the family. He was telling everyone that I had set him up, that I had called CPS just to punish him, that I had ruined his life over one little mistake. My parents were pushing me to apologize and fix things, even though I had nothing to apologize for. My sisters were acting like I had personally betrayed them, even though they had always respected my boundaries when it came to babysitting. It was like I had suddenly become the villain of my own family. Then came the other fallout. Friends of the family started hearing about what happened. Some people took my side, agreeing that my brother had crossed a huge line. But others were whispering about how I had gone too far, how calling CPS was extreme, how I had dragged my own brother through the mud. I started getting messages from relatives I had not spoken to in years. People telling me that I should just let it go, that I was being heartless, that I was supposed to be there for my family no matter what. Meanwhile, my brother? He was playing the victim. He had never once reached out to me directly, but he was telling everyone that I had destroyed his family. That I had ripped his kids away from him over nothing. That I had made him feel unsafe in his own family. The worst part? I started doubting myself. Even though I knew what I did was right, even though I knew that calling CPS was the responsible thing to do, the guilt was creeping in. The isolation was getting to me. And then things escalated. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of work, I came home to find my mom sitting outside my house. She had her arms crossed, looking furious. I barely had time to ask her what she was doing before she launched into her speech. She told me that I needed to apologize to my brother, that I needed to make things right, or she would take back the house. She told me that family is forever. That I was acting selfish. That she had given me this house, and she could just as easily take it away. I felt something in me break. I realized, in that moment, that I could not win. That my family did not care about why I had done what I did. They did not care that my brother had abandoned his kids. They did not care that he had forced them on me with no warning, no respect, no discussion. All they cared about was keeping the peace. But I was done keeping the peace. I told my mom that if she wanted the house, she could take it. That I was done fighting for a family that clearly had no respect for me. And then I walked inside and locked the door behind me. I do not know what is going to happen next. I do not know if my mom is actually going to go through with her threat. I do not know if my brother is ever going to take responsibility for what he did. But what I do know is that I am not going to apologize. Because I did nothing wrong. And if that means losing my family, then so be it. Update 2. I never thought it would come to this, but my mother actually did it. She took the house. And now I am living a life I never expected. After that last conversation with her, I thought she was just trying to scare me. I truly believed that she would cool down, that eventually she would realize she was being unreasonable. But no. Less than a week later, I received the notice. She had started the legal process to take the house back, and since her name was still on the paperwork, there was not much I could do. She had found the one way to punish me that would hurt the most, and she did not hesitate. I was in complete shock. I kept waiting for someone in my family to step in, for someone to tell her she was being ridiculous, but nobody did. My dad remained quiet, my sisters distanced themselves, and my brother? He was probably thrilled. To him, this was justice. This was me paying for what I had done. Suddenly, I was scrambling to figure out my next steps. I did not have a backup plan because, well, who would? Who expects their own mother to kick them out over a situation they did not even create? I spent a few days in a haze, not knowing what to do, where to go, or how to process the fact that my family had turned on me so completely. And then, just when I thought it could not get worse, my brother showed up. I had not seen him in person since the CPS incident, and when I opened my door to find him standing there, I immediately braced myself for another fight. But what he said next nearly made me laugh in disbelief. He told me that, now that I was losing my house, I should consider making amends by babysitting his kids. Since I would not have a place of my own anymore, I could move into his home and help out. He presented it as if he was offering me a solution, as if he was doing me a favor by giving me a purpose in his household. I do not think I have ever felt so insulted in my life. The audacity of this man to not only abandon his kids on my doorstep without asking, but then double down and expect me to become his live-in nanny as some sort of punishment for standing up for myself? It was beyond anything I had ever experienced. I shut that down immediately. But here is where things took another turn. With my options dwindling and no support from my family, I had to figure something out fast. I had savings, but not enough to buy another house right away. I considered moving to another city, starting fresh somewhere far away from all of this. But the thought of uprooting my entire life, because they had wronged me, felt unfair. So I did the one thing my family never expected, I fought back. I got a lawyer and looked into my rights. It turns out my mother taking the house was not as easy as she thought it would be. There were legal loopholes, and I had a case to contest it. The process was exhausting, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was standing up for myself instead of just reacting to their insanity. While I was fighting for my home, something else happened that shook the entire family. CPS followed up. Apparently, my brother was still under investigation. I had assumed that after the initial visit, they would just issue him a warning and move on, but no. They had kept an eye on the situation, and from what I later found out, this was not the first time someone had raised concerns about my brother's parenting. It was like a domino effect. The more they looked into it, the more issues they found. His kids had been showing signs of neglect, not necessarily in a way that screamed outright abuse, but enough that CPS was taking things very seriously. I had never wanted to believe that my brother was that bad of a father, but suddenly, I had to confront the possibility that his reckless behavior was not just a one-time thing, it was a pattern. Then came the moment that changed everything. One day, I got a call. Not from my mom. Not from my sisters. Not from my brother. It was CPS. They told me that my brother's children might need temporary placement with a relative. And since I was the one who had originally called them, and since I had been deemed responsible in all of this, they wanted to know if I would be willing to take them in. I felt like the world had flipped upside down. After everything, after all of this, I was being asked to step up and do the very thing that started this entire mess. I sat with the decision for a long time. I thought about what it would mean. If I said yes, I would be taking on a responsibility that I had originally rejected, one that my brother had tried to force on me. But if I said no, where would these kids end up? It was a moment of reckoning for me. In the end, I said yes. Not because I owed my brother anything. Not because my family expected me to. But because I knew that his kids deserved better. So, in the strangest, most ironic turn of events, I ended up looking after my brother's children, but on my terms. Not because I was manipulated into it. Not because I was guilted into it. But because I chose to. And the best part? The house. After weeks of legal battles, I managed to keep my home. My mother had tried to use it as leverage to control me, but I fought back, and I won. Now, I am standing on the other side of this chaos with full custody of my brother's kids while he is facing a whole mess of legal problems. My mother and father are furious. My sisters are speechless. My brother? He has not even reached out. At the end of the day, I have lost my relationship with most of my family. But I have gained something else, a sense of power over my own life. And 2 kids who, despite everything, deserve stability, care, and a real chance at a good life. So maybe, just maybe, this was how it was always meant to be. Update 3. Now that the dust has settled, I have had time to think. To reflect. To process everything that has happened since the day I made that call. And I keep coming back to the same question. Did I do the right thing? When I first called CPS, I was acting on instinct. I was overwhelmed, blindsided, and genuinely scared for the children my brother had abandoned on my doorstep. I did not have time to consider the long-term consequences. All I knew was that something was wrong, and I could not just ignore it. Since then, my life has completely changed. I won the fight for my house. My mother tried to take it from me as punishment, but she failed. That was a victory I never thought I would get, and honestly, standing up to her was one of the hardest things I have ever done. She raised me to believe that family is everything, that you should always put them first no matter what. But what she really meant was, do what we want, no matter how much it hurts you. My brother lost custody of his kids. CPS did a full investigation, and it turns out there were way more issues than I ever knew about. He was not just an irresponsible father who dropped his kids off unannounced, he was neglecting them in ways I never saw up close. His home environment was unstable, he was unreliable, and there was evidence that this had been a problem for a long time. The fact that he thought nothing of abandoning them with me was just the tip of the iceberg. And now, in a twist of fate I never could have predicted, I am the one raising them. At first, I was terrified. I never planned on being a parent. I had spent so much time fighting against being treated like a free babysitter that the idea of actually taking on full responsibility for these kids felt surreal. But here is the thing, once it was my choice, once I was given the opportunity to decide whether I wanted to step up, it felt completely different. These kids did not deserve any of this. They did not deserve to be caught in the middle of a dysfunctional family war. They did not deserve to be left with someone who could not take care of them. They deserved a stable home, a safe place to grow up, and someone who actually gave a damn about them. And somehow, that ended up being me. I will not lie and say it has been easy. Parenting, especially when it happens unexpectedly, is hard. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, wondering how I ended up in this position. There were moments where I thought, maybe my family was right. Maybe I should have just shut up and let things play out. But then I would look at the kids, at how much happier and more stable they were becoming, and I would remember why I did this. My family is in shambles. My mother and father barely speak to me. My mother is livid that I fought back and won. She genuinely believed she could control me forever, that she could use the house as a way to force me into submission. The fact that I refused to give in, that I stood up to her and refused to apologize, has completely shattered her image of me. She always saw me as the good daughter, the one who would never turn her back on family. And to her, that is exactly what I have done. My sisters? Their reaction has been complicated. They were furious at first, but after seeing the full picture of what was going on with my brother's kids, they have softened a little. They still think I should have handled things differently, but they are no longer painting me as the villain. They know now that I was not overreacting. And my brother? He is out of my life. Completely. He never once apologized. Never once admitted he was wrong. He still blames me for his problems, as if I am the reason he was investigated, as if I am the reason he lost custody. He refuses to acknowledge that his own actions led to this outcome. Honestly? Good riddance. I will not waste my time worrying about someone who refuses to take responsibility for his own kids. So now, here I am. In a place I never expected to be, but one that, against all odds, feels right. I went from being the family babysitter to the actual guardian of 2 kids. I fought for my independence and won. And I lost relationships along the way, but the people I lost were the ones who never really respected me in the first place. And as I look back on it all, I ask myself again, was I wrong to call CPS? No. I was right. I was right. Maybe I did not handle everything perfectly. Maybe I could have tried to talk to my brother first. Maybe I could have found a different way to navigate the situation. But at the end of the day, these kids were in danger. Maybe not in the way that people imagine when they think of abuse or neglect, but enough that it mattered. Enough that CPS took action. And I will never regret stepping in to protect them. So, am I the asshole? No. I am the only one who did the right thing. And I would do it all over again.